In just 6 years, 70 to 85 million people died. That's more than the entire population of Germany today. Gone. Cities were wiped off the map. Families were torn apart. Children who had never held a weapon were swallowed by a war they never started. It was called the Second World War. But for the people who lived through it, it was simply the end of everything they knew. This is the full story, from the first sparks of hatred in a broken Europe to the final moment of silence when the guns stopped firing. This is World War II.
To understand why World War II happened, you have to understand how broken the world already was. It was 1919. The First World War had just ended. Millions were dead. Europe was in ruins. The winning nations, Britain, France, and America, forced Germany to sign a document called the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty humiliated Germany. It stripped them of land, banned them from having a real military, and forced them to pay billions in war damages. The German people were furious. They were starving. Their money was worthless. A loaf of bread cost more than a house had just years before. And into this anger stepped one man, Adolf Hitler. He was a failed artist, a veteran of the First World War, a man full of rage who had found his voice in politics. He told the German people what they desperately wanted to hear, that their suffering wasn't their fault, that they had been betrayed, that Germany could be great again. By 1933, he was Chancellor of Germany. By 1934, he was its absolute ruler. The man who would start the deadliest war in human history was now in power, and the world did nothing to stop him.
Hitler moved fast. In 1936, he sent German troops into the Rhineland, a region he was forbidden from touching under the Treaty of Versailles. Britain and France did nothing. In 1938, he took Austria, absorbing it into Germany without a single shot fired. Britain and France did nothing. He then demanded parts of Czechoslovakia. The leaders of Britain and France flew to Munich and met with Hitler. They gave him what he wanted, hoping that if they kept appeasing him, he would stop. This policy had a name: appeasement. And it was one of the greatest miscalculations in history. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned home waving a piece of paper and declared, "Peace for our time." He was wrong. Less than a year later, on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. This time, Britain and France had enough. 2 days later, they declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun.
Germany fought unlike anything the world had seen before. They called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Fast tanks, dive bombers screaming from the sky, infantry moving at terrifying speed. Before an enemy could react, it was already over. Poland fell in 5 weeks. Denmark and Norway fell in 2 months. Then came the moment that shocked the world. In May 1940, Germany launched its attack on Western Europe. France had built a massive line of fortifications called the Maginot Line. They believed it was impenetrable. The Germans simply went around it, driving tanks through the dense Ardennes forest that France had assumed was impossible to cross. Within days, the entire Allied army in France was trapped. Hundreds of thousands of British and French soldiers were pushed to the beaches of a small town called Dunkirk. What happened next became one of the most remarkable rescues in history. Over 9 days, nearly 340,000 soldiers were evacuated across the English Channel, not by warships, but by hundreds of ordinary civilian boats, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, ferries. It saved the British Army, and it gave Britain the will to keep fighting. France was not so lucky. On June 22nd, 1940, France surrendered. Germany now controlled most of Western Europe. Only Britain remained.
Hitler turned his eyes to Britain. He launched the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, in a campaign to destroy Britain from the sky and force it to surrender. For months, German bombers pounded British cities. London burned night after night. Families slept in underground train stations to escape the bombs. But Britain refused to break. Winston Churchill, Britain's new prime minister, stood before his people and made a promise. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender. And the Royal Air Force, outnumbered and exhausted, fought back. Young British pilots, many barely out of school, flew their Spitfires and Hurricanes against wave after wave of German aircraft. They lost nearly 1,500 planes. But Germany lost more. By October 1940, Hitler quietly abandoned his plans to invade Britain. It was the first time Germany had been stopped. Churchill called it Britain's finest hour. And he was right.
Hitler had made a deal with the Soviet Union, a non-aggression pact. They had agreed not to attack each other. He broke it. On June 22, 1941, in what was the largest military invasion in human history, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German soldiers poured into the Soviet Union across a front nearly 3,000 kilometers wide. At first, it was devastatingly successful. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded and captured. Germany pushed deep into Soviet territory, killing and capturing millions. But then, the Russian winter arrived. Temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees. German soldiers, equipped for a quick summer victory, were freezing to death. Tanks stopped working. Supply lines broke down. And the Soviet people, despite suffering losses almost impossible to comprehend, did not surrender. The Battle of Stalingrad became the turning point. For 5 brutal months, German and Soviet forces fought street by street, building by building, room by room. By February 1943, the German army at Stalingrad was destroyed. 300,000 soldiers had marched in. Fewer than 100,000 walked out as prisoners. Hitler's greatest mistake had broken his greatest army.
We cannot tell the story of World War II without speaking of its darkest chapter. While the war raged across Europe, the Nazi regime was committing a crime unlike any in human history: the Holocaust. Hitler and the Nazi Party had long preached hatred of Jewish people, blaming them for Germany's problems. Now, with Europe under their control, they moved to systematically murder every Jewish man, woman, and child they could find. Jews were rounded up across Europe, from France, Poland, the Netherlands, Hungary, Greece, and transported in crowded cattle cars to death camps.
We shall tell you about the full story of Holocaust in another video. If you are still watching this video, like the video and press the bell icon for latest updates. Your support genuinely matters, as the team of our channel, The History Scroll, puts in genuine effort to bring you amazing topics that you surely would not want to miss. And we would love your valuable suggestions in the comments. Now, let's get back to our video. Until late 1941, the United States had stayed out of the war. That changed on December 7th, 1941, a day President Franklin Roosevelt called a date which will live in infamy. Japan, which had allied itself with Germany and Italy in what was called the Axis, launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In less than 2 hours, 2,400 Americans were dead, 19 warships were damaged or sunk, 300 aircraft were destroyed. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan. 3 days later, Germany declared war on America. The sleeping giant had woken up. America's industrial power was almost impossible to imagine. Its factories began producing tanks, planes, and weapons at a scale Germany and Japan could not match. American soldiers poured into Britain, preparing for the long road back into Europe. The tide of the war was about to turn.
June 6th, 1944, D-Day. It was the largest seaborne invasion in the history of the world. 156,000 Allied troops, American, British, Canadian, and others, crossed the English Channel and landed on 5 beaches on the coast of Nazi-occupied France. The beaches had code names: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. On Omaha Beach, the fighting was the worst. Soldiers jumped from their boats into water and were cut down before they even reached the sand. But they kept going. By the end of the day, the Allies had a foothold in France. Over the following months, they pushed through France, liberated Paris, and drove toward Germany. From the east, the Soviet army was also pushing west, crushing what remained of Germany's strength. Germany was being squeezed from both sides. And in April 1945, Allied forces began discovering the death camps and revealed the full horror of the Holocaust to the world.
By April 1945, Soviet troops had reached Berlin, the heart of the Nazi Empire. Hitler retreated to an underground bunker beneath the city. The man who had dreamed of ruling the world was now surrounded, his empire collapsing around him. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life. In Europe, the war was over. The day was called VE Day, Victory in Europe. But the war in the Pacific continued. Japan refused to surrender. Allied planners estimated that an invasion of Japan could cost over 1 million lives. Then came a decision that changed history forever. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the world's first atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. Tens of thousands died instantly. Many more died from radiation in the weeks that followed. On September 2nd, 1945, Japan surrendered. The Second World War was over.
When the final count was made, the numbers were almost incomprehensible. Between 70 and 85 million people had died. That was roughly 3% of the entire world's population at the time. Cities lay in ruin. Whole nations had been transformed. The map of the world was redrawn. But from the ashes came something new. The United Nations was formed to prevent future wars through diplomacy. The Nuremberg trials held Nazi leaders accountable, establishing that no one is above the law, not even heads of state. And a new world order emerged, one where the horrors of what humanity is capable of were permanently written into memory. World War II ended 80 years ago, but its lessons have never been more important. The cost of hatred, the price of silence, the courage of ordinary people who stood up when it mattered most. We remember them, not because the past is comfortable, but because forgetting it is dangerous. If this video moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear this story. And if you're new here, subscribe, because history has more stories to tell.